My name is Bonnie Dunbar. I'm 33 years old. At my parents' 35th anniversary, my father took the microphone in front of 200 guests. He raised his glass to my brother. "Brilliant," he said. "Successful. The son every father prays for." Then he turned to me. The whole room turned with him. Unlike my failure of a daughter, the one with no future, people laughed, some of them. The rest just went quiet. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't leave. I stood up. I asked for the microphone. My hands were steady. "You done, Dad?" I said. "I've got something to show everyone." Then I walked to the laptop running the slideshow, and I changed the file. What none of them knew was that everything my father was so proud of had been sitting in my ovens the whole time. If your chest is already tight from that, do me a small favor and tap like and subscribe. It helps these stories reach the people who need them. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there right now. I love picturing all of you out there. I'm Bonnie. This is the story of the night a microphone changed everything in my family. But let's go back first. Back to a small kitchen and a recipe that was never meant for the loudest person in the room. The bakery smells like cinnamon before the sun comes up. That's the part no one tells you about owning one. You live inside the smell. It gets into your sweaters, your hair, the lining of your coat. Customers tell me they can smell me coming before the bell over the door even rings. I take it as a compliment. We open at 6. By 5:30, the proofing racks are full, and Dorothy is at the front counter, pen behind her ear, reading the order book out loud like she does every single morning. It's a ritual. It's how I know the day has started. 24 morning buns for the Hendersons, she said that morning, the morning all of this really began. The Wallace christening cake, white, no nuts. They were very firm about the nuts. And the big wholesale order again, heritage crust. I was scoring loaves at the steel table, the knife making its clean little sound through the dough. How big this week? Bigger than last week. She tapped the page with the end of her pen. Whoever they are, they sure love us. As long as the check clears. The check always clears. That's what's strange. She looked up at me over her reading glasses. I just think it's funny we don't actually know who they are. 2 years of orders and I couldn't tell you a single human being's name. Heritage crust. A wholesale account that paid on time, ordered more every week, and asked no questions. I figured it was a cafe group. A hotel, maybe. Or one of those farm-to-table places that wanted to say their bread was local without doing the work. I didn't push. When you run a small shop, you don't interrogate the customer who keeps your lights on. You just bake. That was my first mistake, not asking who. My phone buzzed against the steel. The screen said Mom. My mother and I talked maybe twice a month, always carefully, always like she was checking the ice before she stepped out onto it. "Bonnie?" Her voice started soft. "I wanted to ask you something. About the anniversary. The 35th, October 18th. I've got it on the calendar. Your father's renting Russell's place. The big location, downtown." A pause. 200 people, he keeps saying. 200. That's a lot of people, Mom. It is. Another pause. Longer than the first. I was hoping. The anniversary cake. Would you? I mean, only if you wanted to. I'll make it, I said. Of course I'll make the cake. I heard her let out a breath she must have been holding the whole call. He doesn't know I'm asking you. Your father. I figured that part out. He'd want to order from somewhere fancy. Somewhere with a French name. But I want yours, Bonnie. I want my mother's recipe at my own anniversary. Her voice caught on the word mother. My grandmother had been her mother-in-law, but Mom always said it like a daughter. Is that all right? Is it all right to ask? It's more than all right. I'll make the cardamom rolls too, for the dessert table. People love them. They do, she whispered. Everyone always loves them. When I hung up, Dorothy was watching me, pen still behind her ear. That flat red she gets on her face when she already knows the answer. Free of charge, I'm guessing, she said. It's my parents' anniversary. It's your parents who tell people at the grocery store that you wasted your life on bread. It's also my grandmother's recipe, and my mother asked for it. I went back to scoring loaves. The knife found its rhythm again. I'm doing it for her, not for him. Dorothy didn't argue. She just made a note in the book and pushed the pen back behind her ear. I didn't know it then. I had no way to know it. But that was the last cake I would ever bake for my family without all of them knowing exactly who I was. I have to tell you about my grandmother first, because none of the rest of this makes any sense without her. Grandma Vivian had hands exactly like mine. Wide palms. Short, blunt fingers. Baker's hands, she called them, and she'd hold her hand up next to mine when I was small to show me they matched. The summer I turned 16, she pulled me into her kitchen and told me it was time. Time to learn the rolls. The cardamom rolls that had been in the family for 3 generations, back when the Dunbars had nothing but a folding table at the county market and a recipe. My brother Russell never got pulled into that kitchen. He was 4 years older, busy being the smart one, the one with the trophies and the certificates and the future everyone could already see. Grandma never seemed to mind that he didn't come around the flour. Looking back, I understand now. She wasn't waiting for him. She'd already decided who the kitchen was for. She made me make those rolls 11 times before she'd let me do it alone. 11. I'd get one step wrong, the proofing or the cardamom or the fold, and she'd dump the whole thing and hand me the flour again. This recipe, she told me one afternoon, flour up to her elbows, the window light going gold behind her, is not for the person with the loudest mouth in the room. Anybody can be loud. This is for the one with the most patient hands. She tapped my wrist with one floury finger. That's you, not your brother. You. I was 16. I thought she was just being kind to the grandkid who showed up to keep her company. She wasn't being kind. She was choosing. I just didn't have the ears to hear it yet. We filmed it once that summer. My cousin had one of those little silver camcorders everybody had back then, and he taped Grandma walking through the rolls one rainy day when there was nothing else to do. She talks through every step on that tape, names every fold, and near the end she stops, looks straight into the lens, wipes her hands on her apron, and says my name. I forgot that tape even existed for years. It would matter more than I can tell you. But I'm getting ahead. 3 years after that summer, I was 19, sitting at my parents' dinner table, telling them I was leaving college. I'd done 1 full year. I hated every minute of it. I wanted to bake, and I'd known it since I was 16 with flour to my elbows. I'd practiced how to say it. I'd practiced it in the car the whole drive over. I had reasons lined up like little soldiers. The apprenticeship I'd found, the numbers I'd run, the bakery 2 towns over that had said they'd train me. I never got to a single one of them. My father set down his fork. He has a particular way of setting down a fork. It stops a room. Bake, he said. Flat. Like the word tasted bad. You're throwing away an entire future to play with flour. It's not playing, Dad. It's a craft. It's a business. I found a place that'll... Your brother is at the top of his class. He's going to make something of himself. He turned to my mother, who was looking very hard at her plate, her fork frozen over it. And your daughter wants to make bread. Do you hear this, Lorraine? Do you hear what she's telling us at this table? My mother didn't say anything. She almost never did back then. She just moved her food around the plate in slow circles, and I watched her not look at me, and I understood that I was on my own. I'd been on my own at that table for years. I just hadn't named it before. You'll be back, my father said, and he picked the fork up again like the matter was closed and the verdict was read. When you figure out it's nothing, You'll come back, you'll finish school, and we will all agree to forget this little phase ever happened. Russell was there too. 22, home from his program, lit up with whatever award he'd just collected. He smiled at me across the table. Not cruel, exactly. Worse than cruel. Amused. Like I was a kid who'd announced she was running away to join the circus, and he was deciding whether to be entertained or bored. "Let her try it, Dad," he said, easy, generous. The prince granting a favor he expected to be thanked for. It's kind of cute. Cute. There it was. The Dunbar men had a whole vocabulary for me, and it was all words you'd use for a small dog. Cute, charming, sweet. A phase. Nothing in it was ever a word you'd use for a person you took seriously. I waited for my mother to say one thing. Just one. She didn't. She got up and started clearing plates, and the scrape of the dishes was the only answer I got. I went upstairs that night and packed one suitcase. The small one. I took my grandmother's handwritten recipe cards, wrapped in a clean dish towel, and I left them with nothing else to argue about. No scene, no slammed door. I learned early that you don't win in that house by getting loud. You only confirm what they already think. So I left quiet, and I let the quiet be the loudest thing I'd ever done. Until the 18th, anyway. Then everything changed. Just not the way my father predicted it would. I built the bakery out of nothing. I need you to understand that literally, not as a figure of speech. The first space I could afford had been a laundromat. It still smelled like dryer sheets when I signed the lease, and the floor was that cracked industrial linoleum that grabs your shoes. I scraped it up myself, on my knees, weekends, with a rented machine and a lot of bad words. I bought a used deck oven from a pizzeria that had gone under, and the day they delivered it, the movers set it down wrong and cracked one of my new floor tiles, and I sat down right there and cried. Just once. Alone, with nobody to perform it for. Then I got up and got the mop and kept going. That first month, I slept on a cot in the back room. I couldn't afford an apartment, and the shop both, so I lived in the shop. I'd wake at 3 in the morning, start the dough, and the smell of it proofing in the dark was the only thing that told me I hadn't made the exact mistake my father promised I would. The first week, I sold 11 loaves total. 11. I remember the number because I wrote it on the back of a flour bag and taped it to the wall, partly to track it and partly to dare it to stay that low. The second week, it was 19. By the end of the first month, I'd sold out twice, both times by accident. Both times because somebody had told somebody else. That's the whole secret of a neighborhood bakery, if you want to know it. You don't advertise. You just don't disappoint the one person who walked in on a Tuesday, and you let them do the rest. There were nights I sat on that cot and did the math, and the math said stop. Rent, flour, the loan payment, the electric bill that came in like a punch because deck ovens drink power. The math said my father was right, and I should pack the small suitcase again and go finish school and let everyone forget. I never did the thing the math said. I think that's the only real talent I have. I can sit with a number that says quit and decide, with my whole chest, not to. I called home twice that first year. The first time, my father wouldn't come to the phone. I could hear my mother making excuses with her hand half over the receiver, the way you muffle a phone when the other person in the room is listening. The second time, my mother whispered the whole conversation like she was doing something against the rules. She asked if I was eating. She asked if the shop was warm enough at night. She did not ask how the bread was selling, and I understood that she'd been told not to. Russell didn't call at all. Not once. Not to ask how I was. Not to wish me luck. Not even to mock me, which would at least have been attention. But the neighborhood found me. That's the part of the story my family never understood, because they measure a life in titles and degrees, and the neighborhood measures it in bread. It started with a retired school teacher named Dorothy Pratt. She came in one morning for a single cardamom roll, sat at the one wobbly table I owned, and came back the next day, and the day after that. 3 weeks in, she set down her coffee and asked, plain as anything, if I needed help at the counter. She'd managed a diner for 20 years before she retired. She started the next morning, and she has been with me ever since. Pen behind her ear. Every email, every order, every receipt filed away in folders she labels by hand, because she doesn't trust computers to remember things the way people forget them. The neighborhood adopted us both. The Hendersons, who order morning buns every Saturday. The Wallaces, 3 christenings and counting. The man who ran the hardware store down the block, who bought 1 loaf every Friday for almost 20 years and called it his church. I fed these people at their weddings. I fed them at their funerals. Not one of them ever once asked me where I went to college. There's a thing that happens in a small shop that I don't think my father could ever have understood, because you can't put it on a resume. A woman came in once, years back, on the worst morning of her life. She'd just lost her husband, and she didn't know what to do with her hands or her hours, and she'd walked because she couldn't think of anywhere else to go. I sat her at the wobbly table and gave her coffee and a roll, and I didn't say anything wise because I didn't have anything wise. I just let her sit in the warm and the cinnamon until she could stand up again. She still comes in every week. She told me last year that my shop was the first place she'd felt human after. My father measured a life in titles. I learned to measure it in the people who keep coming back. In 2018, my grandmother died. She'd been slowing down for a year, and near the end she could barely get to the shop, but she came when she could. The last time she came, she sat at the wobbly table with a cardamom roll she could only half eat, and she watched me work the morning rush. When it slowed, she waved me over and took my floury hand in both of hers, the matching hands, hers gone thin and papery. "You did it the patient way," she said. "I knew you would." That was all. She didn't make a speech. She wasn't a speech kind of woman. But I've held on to those 7 words harder than anything my father ever said to me in 33 years. She left specific things to specific people, the way careful women do. To Russell, she left money. To my father, the old hand-painted county market sign, which he'd always been embarrassed by, and which I later found out he put straight into the garage. To me, she left a wooden recipe box and a letter. The letter was short. I'll only share the last line, because the rest of it belongs to me alone. "You already know what you're doing," she wrote in that slanted hand. "Don't let the loud ones tell you otherwise." I put the box on the shelf above the big mixer, where I'd see it every day. I read the letter maybe twice a year, on hard days, and for a long stretch of years, that was simply my life. The shop. Dorothy. The neighborhood that loved me. And far away, a family that mailed a card at Christmas and called me, when they thought I couldn't hear. The daughter who never amounted to anything. I made my peace with it. I honestly believed I had. Until the morning my brother walked back through my door with that big, easy smile. He came in on a slow Tuesday in late winter. I hadn't seen Russell in person in over a year, not since a Christmas where my father spent the meal narrating Russell's accomplishments like a sports broadcast. My brother looked expensive that Tuesday. New wool coat, good shoes, the kind of watch you're meant to notice. "There she is," he said, throwing his arms wide like I was the one who'd been gone all this time. "The little baker. Look at this place. It's charming, Bon. Really charming. Charming. Cute. The Dunbar men and their small dog words. What do you want, Russell?" He laughed like I'd made a joke and dropped onto a counter stool. He spun it once, slow, taking in the racks of bread behind me like a man appraising a property. "Straight to it. I respect that. Always did." He leaned forward, elbows on the counter. "Okay, so, I run restaurants now. 3 of them. Russell's Table. You've heard." I've heard. Everyone had heard. My father made sure of it. We do this whole rustic artisan bread program thing. It's the soul of the concept. Reviewers love it. He spread his hands. "But here's my problem. My supplier is garbage. Frozen, par-baked, trucked in from 3 states away. Tastes like a sponge. And I'm sitting there one night thinking, my own sister bakes the best bread in this entire state, so why in the world am I paying a warehouse? You want to buy bread from me. I want to partner with you. He said the word partner the way a certain kind of man says it, meaning buy. Wholesale. Steady, serious volume. I'll pay top dollar, real money, not a friends and family rate. You bake, I handle the rest. Everybody wins. I should have been suspicious right away. Part of me was. But he was my brother, sitting in my shop, asking for my bread. And there's a stupid hopeful animal that lives in all of us and never fully stops wanting the family that didn't want us. Mine sat up and wagged its tail. It would have to be a real account, I said slowly. Contracts, consistent standing orders. Dorothy handles all of that. She doesn't do handshakes. Perfect. Whatever's clean and simple. I love clean and simple. He stood and buttoned the expensive coat. Then, at the door, he turned back, casual, like it was an afterthought. One thing. Keep it quiet, would you? My investors get strange about sourcing, provenance, all that. I'll set you up under a separate account name so it's not all tangled with the Dunbar name. Cleaner that way, for both of us. A separate name. Heritage Crust. He smiled, pleased with himself. Has a ring to it, doesn't it? Grandma would have liked that one. He was gone before I could decide whether that was a sweet thing to say or a strange one. Dorothy drew up the agreement that week. A standard wholesale supply contract. The buyer listed as Heritage Crust LLC, with billing routed to a management company I didn't recognize. I signed it without much thought. I believed I was getting a generous wholesale customer who happened to be my estranged brother, and I filed the brother part of it away as a thing that might, someday, mean we'd be okay. It was only weeks later, going back through the file for tax reasons, that I noticed it. Down in the fine print of the management company's mailing address, in tiny gray type I'd skated right past, 3 words. Russell's Table. Inc. I stared at it for a while. Then I told myself it meant nothing. Of course, his management company would handle his restaurants and his side ventures both. Of course, I showed it to Dorothy anyway, because I showed Dorothy everything. She read it over her glasses, slow, and she didn't say it means nothing. She said, "Huh." Just that. And she made a small mark in the corner of the page in pencil, the way she marks things she intends to keep an eye on, and she filed it back in the folder she'd labeled by hand. "You think it's strange," I said. "I think your brother spent 10 years not knowing you were alive," she said, "and then drove across town to put your bread in his restaurants under a name that isn't yours. I think a lot of things about that, but you didn't ask me what I think." She closed the cabinet drawer. "You asked me to draw up a contract, so I drew up a contract." I told myself a lot of things that winter. The orders grew. That was the first thing that genuinely didn't add up. Heritage Crust started ordering more bread than 3 restaurants could possibly serve. I do the math on bread for a living. It's most of what the job actually is. 200 loaves a week became 3, then 4. And the cardamom rolls. My grandmother's rolls. The ones I had never even put on the wholesale offering sheet. The ones Russell had specifically asked for. As a special item, for me, for old times. Those alone climbed to 100 dozen a week. 100 dozen. Nobody's restaurant moves this many cardamom rolls, I told Dorothy one evening, both of us staring at the standing order. Not 3 restaurants, not 30. Maybe they freeze them, run them as a special. You can't freeze these. They're terrible frozen. The cardamom goes flat and the crumb turns to rubber. Russell knows that. I told him that to his face. Dorothy looked at the number a while longer. Then where are they going? I didn't have an answer. So I did what I always do when I don't have an answer. I went back to work, and I waited for the world to tell me. The world started telling me in small ways, before the Saturday that made it impossible to ignore. A delivery driver who picked up the Heritage crust order each week mentioned, making conversation, that his last stop was the fancy place downtown, the steakhousey one. I didn't think much of it at the time. A food writer for the regional paper came into my shop one afternoon, bought a cardamom roll, ate half of it standing up, and got a strange working look on her face. "I've had this before," she said, almost to herself. "Recently, I can't place where." I rang her up and said nothing. I had a guess where, by then. I just didn't want to say it out loud and make it real before I had it in writing. The world finished telling me on a Saturday. A woman came in, a regular, a kind-faced retiree named Mrs. Okafor who'd been buying my rolls for years. While I boxed her order, she said brightly, making conversation, "Oh, Bonnie, I had your rolls at a restaurant last week. Downtown. Russell's Table, the fancy one. I nearly cried. They tasted exactly like yours." She laughed. I told my husband, "That's Bonnie's recipe. I'd know it blindfolded." And do you know what the waiter said? He said it was the chef's own secret recipe. Their secret. Imagine, their secret recipe. I kept my face perfectly still. Years of my father had taught me how to do that, at least. I'll give him that one thing. "Small world," I said, and I taped the box shut. But the second she left, I walked into the back and stood by the deck oven, the warm one, and I let the pieces drop into place one at a time. Heritage crust. Russell's Table Inca. 100 dozen cardamom rolls a week. A waiter calling my dead grandmother's recipe the chef's secret. He wasn't buying my bread to serve next to his own. There was no own. He had no bread program. He had me. The entire celebrated bread program at Russell's Table, the thing reviewers singled out, the thing that helped fill 3 dining rooms, was mine. Every loaf, every roll. Baked in my ovens at 3 a.m, by the failure with no future, then trucked downtown and plated under my brother's name. I went back to the front. Dorothy was wiping the counter. "I need every email," I said. "Every order, every invoice, every word, from the very start of the Heritage crust account." She didn't ask why. She set down the rag, went to the filing cabinet, found the folder she'd labeled by hand 2 years before, and started pulling pages. That's when I found the other emails. The ones from this past summer. The ones I'd skimmed and forgotten, back when the Heritage crust orders had briefly stopped cold for 2 weeks, then come roaring back desperate. Russell. In writing. In his own words, his own typing. At 1 a.m. by the timestamp. "Bonnie, I'm begging you. Do not cut me off. If the bread stops, the restaurants are done. I am not exaggerating. Name your price. Whatever you want. Please. I cannot lose this. Please." My brother, who had called my life's work cute, had typed the word "please" to me. And then, 2 messages later, when I'd simply said we'd keep filling the standing order, he'd typed it again. Thank you, please don't ever stop." Dorothy gathered the whole thing into a manila folder. She squared the edges against the counter, the way she squares everything, and slid it across to me. "I've kept all of it," she said. 9 years I've worked here. I keep everything. You never know when a person's going to need to prove they were telling the truth. I looked at the folder. I didn't open it again right then. I just looked at it sitting there on the counter under the warm front lights. If you've ever watched someone take credit for work that was quietly, completely yours, tell me about it down in the comments. The project, the idea, the recipe, the thing you built with your own 2 hands that somebody else stood up and called theirs. I have a feeling I am not the only one who knows that exact, particular silence. And I'm not going to tell you yet what I decided to do with the folder Dorothy slid across that counter. Stay with me. It matters how you carry a thing like that. That night, after I locked up, I took the wooden recipe box down from the shelf above the mixer. And I took out my laptop, and I found the file my cousin had digitized for me years before, and emailed me with a note that just said, "Thought you'd want this." I had never once opened it. I think I was afraid of how much I'd miss her. I opened it. There she was. Grandma Vivian. Flour to her elbows, that summer kitchen, the light going gold and slow through the window behind her. Talking through the cardamom rolls step by step, naming every fold in that flat, certain voice. And then, near the end of the tape, she stops. She wipes her hands on her apron. She looks directly into the lens, directly at me, 20 years later. "This is Bonnie's recipe now," she says. She's the one who'll carry it. Not because she's the loudest one, because she's the one who showed up. I watched it 3 times in a row in the dark bakery. The third time, I noticed something I'd missed. Just before she turns to the camera, off to the side of the frame, you can see a kid's elbow and a sleeve. That was me, 16, just out of the shot, where I'd always been in that family. Present, working, half cut off by the edge of the frame, exactly like the slideshow would do to me 20 years later. Except this time the woman in the middle of the picture had turned to point the camera at the part of the frame everyone else ignored. She'd built a whole monument out of pointing at me. I wasn't angry yet. That surprises people when I tell this part. I was something quieter and a great deal heavier than angry. Because the thing Russell took wasn't really the bread. It wasn't even the money. And there was a frightening amount of money. He took the one thing my grandmother had given to me on purpose, with her eyes open, the only person in that entire family who ever looked at me and chose me. He took her choosing, and he sold it under a fake name to strangers who praised him for it over dinner. My phone rang on the counter. The screen said Mom. Bonnie. Careful voice. Then it cracked clean down the middle. "I have to tell you something, and I'm so ashamed of it I can hardly say it." "Mom, slow down. Your father took money, from the family account, to prop up Russell when the restaurants were drowning last year. A lot of money, Bonnie." She was breathing hard. "And some of it, I think some of it was money your grandmother had set aside. For you, for the shop. There was an envelope and a note, and your father moved it, and he told me to keep my mouth shut, and I did. God help me, I did. I've kept my mouth shut about everything in this family for 35 years. I sat down on the floor of my dark bakery, my back against the oven that was still faintly warm, the phone against my ear and my grandmother frozen on the laptop screen above me. "How long have you known, Mom?" I asked. "About the money." "Since last spring." Her voice was small. I found the bank statement in his desk. I wasn't snooping, I was looking for the car registration, and there it was. The transfer. And the date matched. The date matched the week your grandmother's envelope went missing from the safe. She made a sound that wasn't quite a word. I confronted him. He told me it was a loan to Russell and it was none of my business, and that you'd never know the difference because you'd never had that kind of money anyway. And I let him say that to me, in my own kitchen, about my own daughter. "You were scared of him." "I was scared of everything, Bonnie. For 35 years I was scared of everything. Of him being angry. Of the family looking broken. Of being the woman who couldn't keep the peace." A long breath. "And meanwhile my daughter slept on a cot in a laundromat and built a whole life, and I sent a card at Christmas. I sent a card." I didn't say anything. There wasn't a thing to say to that would have helped. "I used to make those rolls with her, you know," she said quietly. "Before you were born. Your grandmother taught me too. But I never had the patience for the proofing. I'd rush it. She'd shake her head at me." A small, wet laugh. "She never shook her head at you. Not once. I used to wonder how you could stand there for an hour waiting for Doe to do something. Now I think it's the only thing in this family anybody ever did right." "Mom," I said, "are you coming to the anniversary on the 18th? "Of course I'm coming. It's my anniversary. I have to." "Then I need you to do exactly one thing for me that night." My voice came out very calm. Calmer than I felt. "I need you to tell the truth. Just once. When the moment comes, I need you to not stay quiet." She was silent for a long, long time. I could hear my father's television somewhere behind her in the house. "I will," she said finally, and her voice didn't shake when she said it. "I promise you, I will." What none of them knew, not Russell, not my father, not the 200 people who were about to fill my brother's biggest dining room, was that I already had everything I needed in my hands. The folder, the contracts, the desperate emails, and the tape. And of course, the cake. The week before the anniversary, I baked like I was preparing for a war I intended to win politely. I made the cake my mother had asked for, the one built on my grandmother's recipe, and I will tell you without false modesty that it was the best thing I'd made in years. 3 tiers. And 200 cardamom rolls for the dessert table, because my mother loves them and because they were, when you think about it, the truth itself, sitting out in the open on a silver tray, wearing a disguise nobody at that party would recognize. Except me. 4 days before the party, on a Saturday, I drove out to my parents' house for a small family dinner. Just the 4 of us. I don't entirely know why I went. I think some part of me wanted to give my father one final, fair chance to be a human being to me before the 18th. To make the 18th unnecessary. He didn't take it. He never once took it. We were barely through the soup when he started. Russell's newest location. Russell's review in the regional paper. Russell, Russell, Russell. The name like a drumbeat. And then, the way he always does, he swung the spotlight around just to watch me squint in it. "And what's new in the bread world, Bonnie?" he said, smiling at his soup. "Still selling muffins to little old ladies?" "Business is good, Dad." "Good." He turned to my brother as if I'd already left the table. "She thinks small, you know. Always has. Some people just aren't built with the ambition. Not everyone can be you, son." Russell, to whatever small credit he has, looked uncomfortable. He knew. He had typed please to me twice in the dark. He sat there in his father's dining room eating my bread, because of course it was my bread, even there, knowing exactly whose ambition kept his name in the paper, and he said nothing. He pushed his roll around his plate and said nothing at all. Under the table, my mother found my hand. She didn't speak, but she held on tight, tighter than she ever had, and that was new. That was the whole conversation, right there, in the grip of her fingers. I drove home that night and I made copies of everything. The contracts, the desperate emails, the photos a few of my regulars had texted me, unprompted, over the past months. My cardamom rolls on Russell's table plates, my loaves in his bread baskets, captioned things like, "Isn't this yours?" The video of my grandmother. I put all of it onto one small black flash drive, the kind you buy in a 3-pack at the drugstore. The night before the party, I almost talked myself out of all of it. I sat at my own counter after close, the flash drive in front of me, a cup of tea going cold, and I argued both sides like a courtroom. One side said, "This is your mother's anniversary, not your trial. Make the cake, eat the dinner. Let the bread be a quiet thing only you and the bank ever fully understand. Don't burn down a family in a rented dining room." The other side said almost nothing at all. It just played the tape in my head. She's the one who'll carry it, not because she's the loudest. Because she's the one who showed up, and it asked one question. If you don't carry it, who will? I made the cake. I told myself that was decision enough. The flash drive could just ride along in my coat pocket and never come out. That was the deal I made with myself to be able to sleep. Dorothy was locking the back door when I slid the flash drive into the inside pocket of my coat. "You bringing that on Saturday?" she asked. She didn't have to say what. "I don't know yet." "Bring it." She pulled the door shut and tested the handle, the way she always does, twice. "You don't have to use it. You may not need it. But a woman should never walk into a room like that one empty-handed. Trust me on this. I managed a diner 20 years. I've seen how those rooms go." I left the flash drive in my coat pocket. I told myself, the whole drive home, that I almost certainly wouldn't need it. Russell's table, the downtown location, holds 200 people when they pull the big partition back and open the private room into the main floor. That night, the 18th, they pulled it back. It was beautiful. I'll give my father that much, and I'll give it to him honestly. White flowers everywhere. Warm gold light in the fixtures. A long head table dressed in linen. My grandmother's 3-tier cake up on a stand where the whole room could admire it. And my 200 cardamom rolls fanned out on silver trays. And I stood near the back and watched perfect strangers bite into them and close their eyes and sigh. Not one of them knowing they were eating the very thing this room was about to go to war over. There was a projector. A big screen mounted behind the head table, running a slideshow of my parents through the decades. Their wedding, young and hopeful. Russell's graduations, all of them, in order. Vacations. And I noticed, the way your tongue finds the gap of a missing tooth, that I appeared in that entire slideshow exactly twice. Once as a baby in somebody's arms. Once in a group shot, half of me cut clean off by the edge of the frame. The laptop running the slideshow sat on a small draped table off to the side of the screen. Unattended. A wireless presenter clicker resting beside it. Dinner went the way these things always go. Toasts. Easy laughter. My father holding court at the center of the head table. Russell working the room between courses. Big white smile. A hand on every shoulder. The successful son moving through his own successful restaurant like a man who owned the floor he walked on. Which, technically, the bank and I both knew, he barely did. Then my father stood. He tapped his glass with a knife until the room hushed. He asked the manager for the wireless microphone, and someone brought it over, and the whole room went warm and quiet and ready to adore him. 35 years, he said into the mic, and I am the luckiest man alive. Applause. He talked about my mother, about the home they built, about the business he'd run before he retired. And then he turned, slowly, toward my brother. And I'm proud, to say it in his own restaurant. My son, Russell. Brilliant. Successful. The man every father in this room dreams of raising. The room broke into applause. Russell gave a small, humble wave, the prince accepting his due, and then my father turned, and the whole room turned with him, 200 faces swinging around like a field of sunflowers following the sun, and every single one of them landed on me where I sat near the back. Unlike my failure of a daughter, he said, smiling into the microphone, to 200 people. The one with no future. Well, we can't all be winners, can we? Some people laughed. The startled kind of laugh that doesn't know where to land. Most of the room just went silent and found something fascinating about their plates. I heard a single fork touch china somewhere to my left. I heard my mother, 3 seats from my father, make a small wounded sound. I didn't cry. I need you to know that. I did not defend myself. I did not run for the door. I sat there for a moment first. I want to be honest about that. I sat in my chair near the back with 200 faces on me, and I felt the old familiar pull to do what I'd always done in that house. To shrink, to wait it out, to let the quiet be the loudest thing I'd ever do, and then drive home and bake at 3 in the morning and let it go. The small suitcase. The clean exit. I had 33 years of practice at leaving that family without a sound, and then I thought about my grandmother's hand in both of mine, gone thin and papery. You did it the patient way. I knew you would. I stood up. The room flinched at the scrape of my chair, and I walked, slow and calm, the whole length of that beautiful room, past the white flowers and the silver trays of my own rolls, up to the head table, and I held out my open hand to my father for the microphone. "You done, Dad?" I said. "I've got something to show everyone." He didn't hand it over at first. He held on to the microphone, still half smiling, absolutely certain this was a bit, certain his quiet daughter would mumble something small and sit back down and let the night go on. "Bonnie," he started. "It's Russell's restaurant," I said, low, just for him, under the room's held breath. "You really wouldn't want a scene in Russell's restaurant." He handed me the microphone. That was his first mistake of the night, and it was exactly the same as his last one. He never, not for a single second, believed I had anything. The failure with no future. What could she possibly have? I walked over to the laptop on its draped little table. I have set up enough catering slideshows and wedding projectors in my years to know my way around one in the dark with my eyes half closed. I tapped the trackpad. I clicked out of the slideshow of wedding photos, and I opened the file I had loaded onto the black flash drive that afternoon, because Dorothy was right, the way she usually is. A woman should never walk into a room like that empty-handed. The first slide went up on the big screen behind the head table, 6 feet tall, for 200 people to read. It was the wholesale supply contract. Heritage Crust, LLC across the top in plain black type. And down at the bottom, the billing entity. The part I'd once almost missed in tiny gray print, now blown up enormous. Russell's Table Inc. "For the last 2 years," I said, calm, my voice carrying. "All the bread at Russell's Table, the bread program you've read about, the rolls you're eating tonight, has come from one single supplier, a bakery called Heritage Crust." I let it hang there a second. Heritage Crust is not a real bakery. It's an account name. My brother set it up so that none of you would ever know the bread was mine. Russell shot up halfway out of his seat. Okay, hang on, that's not... We use multiple vendors. That's just one of several partner kitchens." He turned to the room with his palms out, his big smile cranking back to life. "She's confused, folks. Bonnie, sit down. You're embarrassing yourself, sweetheart." There it was, the denial. He simply could not help himself. I clicked the trackpad. Slide 2. His email. From this past summer. Blown up 6 feet tall so the very back of the room could read every word of it. "Bonnie, I'm begging you, do not cut me off. If the bread stops, the restaurants are done. Name your price, whatever you want. Please, I cannot lose this." I read it out loud, slowly, into the microphone. And when I reached the word please, I read it twice, the way he had typed it. The room made a sound. Not quite a gasp. A long, low, collective exhale. 200 people arriving at the very same understanding in the very same instant. I watched it move across the tables. A woman near the front pressed her napkin to her mouth. 2 men at a side table looked at each other and then, slowly, looked at the half-eaten rolls on their own plates. Mrs. Okafor, my regular, who must have been invited as a friend of the family, sat very upright with her hand flat on her chest, and I swear she nodded once, like something she'd suspected for months had just been confirmed. The food writer from the paper had stopped eating entirely and started, very quietly, taking notes. Russell's face came apart. The smile fell off it completely. "Where did you... Those are private messages. You have no right..." "You sent them to me," I said. "To my bakery. The little place that sells muffins to little old ladies." I clicked again, and my grandmother filled the screen. The summer kitchen, the gold light through the window, flour to her elbows. The entire room went dead still as her voice came rolling out of the restaurant's good speakers, the expensive sound system Russell himself had installed to set a mood. "This is Bonnie's recipe now," my grandmother said, to all 200 of them, 20 years after that rainy afternoon. "She's the one who'll carry it, not because she's the loudest, because she's the one who showed up." I reached over and turned off the microphone. I didn't need it anymore. The room was so quiet I could have whispered and reached the back wall. My father had stopped smiling somewhere around the second slide. Now he reached for the back of his chair to steady himself, and he missed it, his hand closing on air. and he caught the edge of the linen-draped table instead and held on hard. He could barely stand. A man who had spent 35 years standing on top of a single story about his children, watching that story come apart on a 6-foot screen in his son's own dining room, in front of every person whose good opinion he had ever cared about in his life. Russell sat down hard in his chair. He put one hand flat over his mouth. He did not deny one more thing, because there was nothing left in the room to deny. The proof was on the screen, in his own words, in his grandmother's own voice, and it was on every plate, at every table. Half-eaten, delicious mine. And into that enormous silence, my mother stood up. She was shaking. I could see it from where I stood. She walked the length of the head table to me, slow, and she held out her hand for the microphone, and I switched it back on and gave it to her. And for one bad second I was sure she'd lose her nerve the way she had at 1,000 dinner tables across 35 years and just hand it back. She didn't. "My mother-in-law," she said into the microphone, and her voice wobbled and then found its feet. "Vivian Dunbar gave that recipe to Bonnie. On purpose, with her eyes wide open. Because Bonnie was the one who showed up to her kitchen, year after year, when no one else could be bothered." She drew a breath. "And I have stayed quiet in this family for 35 years. I stayed quiet when my husband took money my mother-in-law set aside for our daughter and used it to bail out our son. I knew. And I said nothing." She turned, slowly, to face the whole room. This woman who never spoke, who had spent her entire life looking at her plate. "I am done being quiet. Our daughter built something real, with her own 2 hands, out of nothing. And the 2 men I love most in this world called her a failure to make themselves feel a little taller." Her eyes found my father, who was still gripping the table. "Happy anniversary, Walter." She handed me back the microphone. She was crying. But she was standing up perfectly straight, straighter than I'd seen her stand in my whole life. If you've ever had to stand up in a room full of people and let the plain truth speak for you, then you already know the secret about it. It doesn't feel like winning. It feels like finally being able to breathe. So take 1 second, wherever you are right now, whatever time it is where you're listening. Think about the one boundary you've been afraid to set, the one true thing you've been swallowing down for years just to keep a fragile peace. You don't have to use it tonight. But the way my Dorothy would put it, a person should never walk into the hard rooms of their life empty-handed. I didn't gloat. There was honestly nothing in that room to gloat about. I reached over and turned the projector off, and the slideshow snapped back to a frozen photo of my parents young and hopeful on their wedding day, and I set the microphone down gently on the linen next to my grandmother's 3-tier cake. "I'm going to say one more thing," I told the room. "No microphone now, just my own voice, which carried fine in all that silence. And then I'm going to go home, because I open at 6. A few people laughed, soft, relieved, the good kind of laugh, the kind that's on your side. The bread you ate tonight is my grandmother's recipe. It always was. As of Monday morning, the Heritage Crust account is closed." I looked directly at my brother, who would not look up from the table. "Russell's table is welcome to find a new supplier. Or it can put my name on the menu and pay retail. In writing, like every other customer I have. Your choice. But this is the last thing you ever get from me with my name hidden." I picked up one of the cardamom rolls off the nearest tray and held it up so the room could see it. My grandmother used to say this recipe wasn't for the loudest person in the room. It was for the one with the most patient hands. I set the roll back down. I waited 20 years to find out she was right. I'd have waited longer, but I won't wait quiet anymore. I found my coat on the rack by the door, the flash drive still warm in the inside pocket. My mother walked me out, her arm through mine. On the cold sidewalk under the restaurant's awning, she took both my hands in hers. "I should have done that 20 years ago," she said. "At that dinner table." You did it tonight, Mom. That's the part that counts. I drove home. I opened at 6 the next morning, like always. The Hendersons came in for their morning buns and didn't know a thing, and the normalcy of it was the best gift I got that whole week. A few weeks later, it all settled into a new shape, the way things do if you let them. The morning after the party, I half expected the phone to ring off the hook with people taking sides. It didn't. What happened instead was quieter and better. The shop got busy. Then it got busier. People who'd been at that anniversary, and people those people told, started driving across town to buy bread from the woman they'd watched stand up. A man I'd never seen came in, bought a single cardamom roll, ate it at the wobbly table, and told me on his way out that his daughter had given up a sensible degree to be a potter, and that he was going to call her tonight. I had to go in the back for a minute after that one. Russell's table quietly closed 2 of its 3 locations within a month. Without the bread, and without the secret, there wasn't much holding the concept up. The 3rd location stayed open, and one day a regular sent me a photo of the new menu. Down at the very bottom, in small italic type, a single line. Breads by Dunbar's Bakery. He pays retail now. In writing. Dorothy filed the contract in a folder she labeled by hand, and she tested the cabinet drawer twice after she closed it, same as always. My father has not called. I didn't expect that he would, and I've stopped waiting for it. The story he spent 35 years building can't be rebuilt, and a man like my father would rather have the silence than the truth. I've made my peace with the silence. It's a great deal quieter than the things he used to say. I heard, through my mother, that he tells a different version now. That I made a scene, that I humiliated the family. Not one word, in his version, about what he said into that microphone first. That's how it works with men like him. There's always a scene, and it's always somebody else who made it. I used to lose sleep over being cast that way. Now I just think, let him keep the version he can live with. I've got the receipts. Russell sent exactly 1 text, months in. It said, "I'm sorry. You were always the real one." I haven't answered it yet. I might, someday. I have patient hands. My grandmother made sure of that. Some doughs you don't rush. My mother comes to the shop on Sundays now, when we're closed, and it's just us. She sits at the counter where Dorothy first sat all those years ago, and she rolls cardamom dough beside me, and it turns out her hands are just like mine. Just like Grandma's. Wide palms, short, blunt fingers. Patient. The bakery still smells like cinnamon before the sun comes up. I still live inside the smell. The neighborhood still finds me, the way it always has. And up on the shelf above the big mixer, exactly where it has sat for years, there's a wooden recipe box, and a short letter, and 1 line in slanted handwriting that I read a good deal more than twice a year now. You already know what you're doing. Don't let the loud ones tell you otherwise. I never did, Grandma. I just had to wait for the whole room to find out.